The Soul Redeemer, Book 1, Part 2, Awakening, Chapter 6, Generations. The 1960s. At a very young age, Nicole was aware of the emotional distance between herself and her grandfather. Granny was sweet and lovable, but Granddad seemed to avoid contact with her except for the quick goodbye hug he bestowed on her as she was leaving his home. And that hug only happened because her parents told her to hug him goodbye. His rejection of her became more apparent when the whole family was gathered at Granny and Granddad's for a holiday, and she watched as he wholeheartedly hugged each cousin as they walked out the door. In all of her almost 4 years, he had never hugged her that way, had never playfully tickled her face with his whiskers as he did with the others. Nicole backed away from the door, from him. Mother called her to come forward for her hug, but fear held her back. His eyes were kind enough, but she could sense his reluctance, his disgust at the thought of touching her. She would have run out the door past him if it had been possible, but Mother took her hand and led her to him. Granddad dutifully picked her up and quickly gave her a squeeze, then set her down. There was no jolly laughter and kind words spoken to her as there had been with the other cousins. What was wrong with her that he didn't want to seem to touch her? It was a great relief when she stepped into Granny's comforting, loving arms. Granny's hugs always seemed to make her feel better. As David hugged each grandchild, a memory flashed through his mind. A memory of God's promise of faithfulness to him, his children and grandchildren, if he would choose to love God with his whole heart. He heard the words being repeated in his mind as if it were yesterday. Through your faithfulness, all of your children will love and serve me. It will be that one of your grandchildren will overcome and destroy the seeds the enemy has planted in your bloodline that continually sprout up and try to overcome my seed. She will be a fierce warrior in my kingdom and will love me as your mother loved me. David pictured the prophet Samuel in the Bible as he lined up Jesse's sons and was searching God's heart to discover which one of them was to be anointed as Israel's king. As he hugged the first 6 children, David questioned the Lord, "Is it this one, Lord?" But the Lord was silent. Then David looked at Nicole. She had backed up against the wall as far away from him as she could. Fear was written in her eyes, and fear welled up in his own heart as those distant memories of another Nicole invaded his mind. The poor child. He knew with his mind that she was innocent, but his heart had not been able to process the truth, and it was his heart that always seemed to win. David's wife loved the name Nicole, but he had forbidden her to use that name or even mention it. However, his daughter had named her girl Nicole. He had nearly begged her not to, but she had wanted to please her mother, and now, every time he saw the girl, he was tormented with memories. This day, as he dutifully picked Nicole up and hurriedly gave her a squeeze, David's heart jumped within him. He nearly dropped her in revulsion. "Not her, Lord! Certainly not her!" But the Lord replied, "Why not her, David? I am in the business of healing and restoration, and it is time for me to heal the pain in your heart that feeds the bitterness of your soul. There is an open door for the enemy, and it must be closed. For many years I have set a guard over this vulnerable place in your heart, but it is time for this well of defilement to be cleansed. Will you allow me access to this painful place? For you see, this is not only a breach in your life, but it is a gaping hole in your family line that Satan will take full advantage of in leading his armies into your bloodline. As we speak, they're already in place, waiting for the moment when I remove my guard from your heart. Will they find a gap through which they can enter, or will they find a solid, impenetrable wall?" God had David's attention now. He wanted to pass on a godly heritage and certainly didn't wish evil on any of his children or grandchildren, not even Nicole. As the company left, David went outside to the small carriage house behind their home that had become a sanctuary. God, what do I do? I've carried this pain, this bitterness so long, I don't know if I can be rid of it. I will cleanse and heal you, David, if you will surrender to me. You must understand that your granddaughter Nicole is not your stepmother. Her name means victory of the people. Nicole, your stepmother, was on the other side seeking victory for those in the rebellion. My little Nicole has been chosen to seek victory for my people. She carries the mark of a leader and a warrior and will have to choose which side she will serve. Pray for her, David, for the battle for her soul will be fierce. But first, forgive your stepmother, because the earnest prayer of a righteous man makes tremendous power available. And then prayerfully embrace this little one. Pray that my spirit will be strong in her. Pray that the encounters with the enemy that are sure to come will send her into my arms, just as it did with you, rather than to tear her from me. The enemy sees the mark on her as well, and she will need your prayers as she encounters fierce battles for her own soul, for the victory of your bloodline, and for many others that she will lead into spiritual freedom. David knelt at his workbench and surrendered all the pain in his heart to the only one who could truly bear it, and indeed had already done just that through his blood sacrifice on the cross. Tears ran down wrinkled old cheeks and into his beard as he allowed Jesus to bring all the memories of abuse to his mind, and then, in obedience to God, chose to forgive his stepmother, Nicole, for each and every one of them. Strength, honor, and glory shone upon David's spirit, soul, and body as the wound was healed and the Spirit's seal was set upon his heart. The demons were restless. They didn't know what was happening, but they knew something big was taking place or was about to, and they were drooling in anticipation at the thought of charging into David's bloodline and spreading their defilement and destruction. They watched in eagerness as the large guardian who had been standing in front of the gap with his sword drawn throughout David's lifetime suddenly looked up, sheathed his sword, and disappeared. It was time for them to feast. But as they began charging toward what they thought would be an opening, those in the front line stopped as quickly as they had begun, causing a massive pileup of demons colliding one on top of the other. The air was thick with curses and foul language, confusion and chaos. Bringing order to this bunch was no easy matter, but finally things calmed down enough for their leader to examine the situation. It would be a dark day for this troop, for the breach had been repaired. And not just repaired, but had been made like brand new. There was no way through to the bloodline from this angle. As the news spread throughout the ranks, violence and fighting broke out as the hungry demons turned their rage and bloodlust onto one another. On the other side, in the heavenlies, a full-blown victory celebration was in progress with singing and music and dancing. Not only had David allowed the healing wings to work a miracle in his own life, but he was praying for little Nicole. His prayers were already being answered, for some of the mightiest angels had been assigned to her and were being dispatched at that very moment.